So picking up where we left off, talking about some different things involving points, what we're going to look at next here is the midpoint formula. So the midpoint formula is what you want to use when you're looking to find what the point would be that is in the middle of two endpoints on a line segment. So the midpoint formula here, which is what this is here, you have x1 plus x2 over 2, and that'll tell you what the midpoint of the x coordinate is, comma y1 plus y2 over 2, and that'll tell you what the midpoint is for the y coordinate. So as far as an example goes, we have here, find the midpoint of the line segment joining the points at negative 5, 3 and 9, 3. So first over here, I'm going to plot those 2 points. So negative 5, positive 3 is going to be here. And then positive 9, positive 3 is going to be here. So as far as here's the segment that connects those two, and I'm looking for what would the coordinates of the midpoint be. So in terms of the formula, I'm just going to sort of abbreviate this with midpoint. What I want to do is, first I want to take the sum of the x values, so I'm going to start with doing negative 5 plus 9 over 2. Then I'm going to take the sum of the y values, positive 3 and positive 3, and I'm going to put that over 2. So when I go to work this out, negative 5 plus 9 is negative 4 over 2, or is that's a negative 5, so this would be 4 over 2, comma 3 plus 3 is 6, so this would be 6 over 2, and when I simplify that, this is just going to be 2 comma 3. So that is the coordinates of the midpoint that joins these 2 points together here. So if I plotted that on my graph, I think you'll see here that 2, 3 is going to be right about here, and that in fact does look like the center there for those 2 points. So I got that there for the midpoint formula. Then as I move on to the next question here, and this has more to do with the distance formula than the midpoint formula, but a question here says if a football quarterback throws a pass from the 28-yard line 40 yards from the sideline, a wide receiver catches the pass on the 5-yard line 20 yards from the same sideline, how long is the pass? So the question's basically, if you look over here, the question is basically asking you, what is the distance from this point here to this point here? So that in fact is the distance formula, which is what we talked about in the previous lesson. So distance formula here, I'm going to have the square root of, I'm going to start with x1 minus x2, so this will be in parentheses 40 minus 20 squared, plus, also in parentheses I got here y2 minus y1 squared, so this will be 28 minus 5 squared. So when I go to work this out here, I have 40 minus 20 is 20, and then 20 squared would be 400, plus 28 minus 5 is 23, and 23 squared would be 529. So when I go to add these together, this is going to be the square root of 929. So as I finish this off here, the square root of 929, I'm going to pull my calculator up here. So when I do this here, I got the square root of 929. And when I work that out, this comes out to be roughly, if we rounded this to the nearest tenth, we would say this is roughly about 30.5. So the answer to this would be roughly about 30.5 yards. So that's the distance from this point here to this point here. So that's just some different things that we did previously with the distance formula. Some other things involving midpoint. This question here is more of an application type. And the question says, Starbucks Corporation had annual sales of approximately $9.8 billion in 2009 and $11.7 billion in 2011. Without knowing any additional information, what would you estimate the 2010 sales to have been? So if you notice here, it gives you data from 2009 and also data from, whoops, that should be this right here, data from 2009, and then it also gives you data from 2011. So 2010 essentially would be the midpoint between those 2 years. So for this question here, because 2010 is in the middle of 2009 and 2011, I want to use the midpoint formula here again. So first I'm going to take the x values, which I'm going to define as the year. So I'm going to say 2009 plus 2011 over 2, which we know will come out to be 2010. And then when I do y1 plus y2, my y's are going to be the dollar amounts here. So I have 9.8 billion plus 11.7 billion over 2. So when I go to work this part out here, this is going to come out to be 2010. And then when I work this out here, this is going to be 9.8 plus 11.7, that's 21.5 over 2. And then when I divide that out, this comes out to be 10.75. So to answer this particular question, it says, what would the estimate of the 2010 sales, what would you estimate the 2010 sales to have been? Well, we would estimate this to be roughly about $10.75 billion. So anytime you're doing an application question, just always remember to answer the question that's being asked. Okay, so that's what the answer to that one is there. And then finally, we're going to finish up here with some different things with points involving translations. So the question says the triangle has the vertices -1, 2, 1, -4, and 2, 3. And it says to shift the triangle 3 units to the right and 2 units up and find the vertices of the shifted triangle. So essentially what I'm going to do is first I'm going to plot these points. So here's -1, 2, that's going to go here. 1, -4 would be down here. And then 2, 3 is going to be up here. So if I connect these points to make a triangle, what the question is asking me to do is if I were to take this entire triangle and move each of the points 3 units to the right and 2 units up, what would the coordinates of these 3 points be if I do that? So I'm going to take each of the points here, I'm just going to list them off to the side here. -1, 2, 1, -4, and 2, 3. So if I were to take each of these points and shift them 3 units to the right, what I would be doing mathematically here is I would be taking each of the x coordinates and adding 3 to them. And if I were to shift each of the points 2 units up, I would basically be taking all the y coordinates and I would be adding 2 to them. So when I go to do that, for instance with this first point here, if I take -1 and I add 3 to it, that's going to be +2. And if I take +2 and I add 2 to that, that's going to make this +4. So that first point there is going to be from -1, 2, that's going to shift to the point 2, 4. Same thing with the second point. If I take +1 and I add 3 to it, that's going to make this +4. And then if I take the y coordinate -4 and I add 2 to that, that's going to make this -2. So that's what I get when I do that there. And then the last point here, 2, 3, if I take the x coordinate and I add 3 to it, that's going to make this +5. And then if I take the y coordinate and I add 2 to that, that's going to also make that +5. So that's what the new triangle, or that's what the vertices would be of the new triangle if I were to take it and shift it 3 units to the right and up 2 units. So that basically takes care of some of the things that we're going to look at in regards to plotting points. We did some different things with the distance formula, we did some different things with midpoint, and we also talked about some applications and some translations. One of the things that we will look at in the next set of notes has to do with some different things with linear functions, how to graph lines, how to write equations for lines, and some different applications that also go with lines.